It's lovely to be here today. It was lovely to be welcomed to this country. It's also great to hear about the local and state initiatives that have been taken to reduce waste and maximise resource recovery. I'm here to focus specifically on what we'd like to see out of our federal government, and in particular, I guess this might be considered an action list for our new Environment Minister. And now I have to figure out where to point this thing. Nope. Win. First, I should explain what ACOR is. ACOR is Australia's peak body for resource recovery, recycling and remanufacturing. Our members are organisations that have invested in recycling in Australia. They operate across a variety of material streams, including paper, plastic, glass, metal, tyres, textiles, oil, batteries, electronic products, construction and demolition material, you name it. But together their priority is to make sure that we are remaking what is recovered from waste streams into products for a market. And they are together, of course, committed to the delivery of a circular economy through the recycling value chain. We do know that recycling is not the circular economy. There are a whole lot of elements that we need to address in order to achieve circularity in Australia and across the globe. But recycling is the link that closes the loop, and without it, we don't have a proper circular economy. We have seen some terrific momentum internationally towards a circular economy and some excellent international commitment, and I'm seriously struggling with the clicker. Sorry. The UN has come together, the EU has come together and made some interesting progress in relation to circularity reform and particularly product stewardship. The UK has implemented measures, for example, relating to plastic and recycled plastic. And Australia also is committed at a federal and a state level to a circular economy. They've said by 2030, we wish them luck and we're going to work hard to support that. We have national packaging targets, which we know have not been met by this year, which they were intended to, including, for example, 100% reusable, recyclable, compostable packaging. We have a national waste policy action plan, which includes a target of 80% resource recovery by 2030. Included in that waste policy action plan are export regulations that ban the export of unprocessed plastic, glass and tyres and regulate the export of recovered fibre as well. We've seen good investment by states and the federal government in recycling infrastructure. We'd like to see more. And there is, at a federal level, the introduction of a national framework for recycled content traceability, which helps to verify recycled content made in Australia and support procurement of that product. We've also seen, as we've heard, commitment towards packaging reform. On the other hand, progress is lagging. We'll hear more about this from Joe immediately after me, I understand. But with a resource recovery target of 80% by 2030, we haven't seen the commensurate progress towards that target. We are also producing more plastic waste and recovering less than we should be. And there has been, as we've heard, no clear progress on the packaging reform that we really need to see. Happily, our sector is still making great strides and we're gearing for growth. We have grown more than 1.5 times the size of Australia's economy over the last decade, and our employment has expanded 4 times faster. This is a growth area, which is a good thing given that the targets that we need to meet. We've recycled over 47 million tonnes in the last reporting period, and our sector contributes almost $19 billion to the Australian economy. One thing we do need to be clear about, though, is that waste management is not recycling. Waste management is a logistical enterprise. It's an essential service. We can't have a civilised society without it. But it's about the movement, treatment, containment of waste. Recycling is a manufacturing supply chain. We turn recovered materials into new products. And in that context, That supply chain is comprised of three key elements: collection and sorting, processing, and end markets. They all, each in their various elements, must be scaled and they must be economically viable. Collection alone, this is going to be a challenge for all speakers. Collection alone isn't recycling, but it is essential. Our sector relies on clean, well-sorted materials in order to function viably. And curbside collection, and I think so many in this room are engaged at the front line there, plays a vital role. We do need to be mindful, though, that what we collect doesn't necessarily get recycled unless the rest of the system stacks up too. And we would want to make sure that those who are working, for example, in curbside systems, are ensuring they're not wish cycling by encouraging items that cannot be processed and do not have markets into our, for example, yellow bins. Processing, I don't need to go into too much. It is a vast and complex area depending on your material stream, but generally would include separation, sortation, baling, size reduction, cleaning, refining of materials. That process requires consistent feedstock. It requires clean and well-sorted feedstock. And like any manufacturing process, recycling depends on robust, functioning markets for what comes out the other side. Without markets, we don't have a viable recycling system. What we'd like to see addressed at a national level, knowing that at a local level there's much to do and it is being done. I was so glad to hear what Coffs Harbour is undertaking, and at a state level we're taking strides as well, but what we'd like to see at a national level is support in addressing some of the roadblocks we see in our sector. There is a lack of market demand for domestically recycled materials. We have, across all states and territories, a generally misaligned and fragmented regulatory framework that still prioritises risk elimination over circular outcomes and indefinitely often classifies recovered resources as waste. We can't reach a circular economy with those two approaches. We have policy uncertainty around packaging reform. We have product stewardship schemes that are trying to do the right thing but often lack consistency, accountability, and too often undermine real recycling outcomes. And of course, batteries and consumer electronics continue to threaten Australia's recycling infrastructure and our workers' lives. Going to markets, we need to be very clear. Australia is a net importer of finished goods. They all end up in domestic waste streams. And at that end of use, the priority is recycling. There has to therefore be a robust and viable market for what comes in, both domestically and internationally, for locally produced recycled commodities. One thing we keep getting burred up in when we talk about procurement of recycled content is the confusion about what that is. When we say recycled content, we mean domestic recycled content. Importing recycled content ultimately displaces locally produced material and undermines Australia's recycling sector. All products and materials distributed in our market enter our waste streams. We have export regulations, as I've mentioned, that regulate what can leave the country in unprocessed form. We have to process much of it here, and we rightly should. We therefore must find markets for the product that we make here. There are barriers to those markets, including cost competitiveness. There's a reason why we are an importer of finished goods. We're an expensive country to make stuff in. We pay our workers fairly, we manage our environment safely. On the other hand, we have a dispersed population, which makes our logistics higher in cost. We have high energy costs. It costs more to make here. It costs more to remake here, but we still must find markets for what we remake. There is also, I guess, a cultural issue to be addressed. We always see with change a reluctance to do so, and underpinning that we also have standards and specifications that often specifically preclude recycled content. There's a lack of incentives, broad scale, to procure domestically recycled content, and this is particularly the case for domestically recycled plastics, which are much cheaper in virgin form and much cheaper to procure recycled offshore. In terms of the export regulation, we have an Act that regulates the export of certain unprocessed materials, which we welcome. It has supported industry confidence in domestic recycling. On the other hand, the way that Act is administered, and particularly licensing for recycled finished goods, is not fit for purpose, and it needs to be adapted. We have an approach currently that is costly and inefficient, and it doesn't distinguish between waste and finished recycled commodities. The other problem with it is that it's largely unenforced, meaning that those organisations that seek to comply with this regulation are undermined by those who skirt the rules. Thankfully, there's been a review of the RAW Act, and hopefully over the next few months we might see a real opportunity to improve. But in terms of driving demand for recycled content, what we'd like to see from our new Environment Minister is prioritising the procurement of Australian recycled content in all government-funded projects, also underpinned by a traceability framework to verify that that is really what you're buying. We also, of course, need to see a streamlining of the licensing processes for recycled products. And we've mentioned before that Australia's packaging regulation is well overdue for an overhaul. The framework currently for packaging was introduced in '99, mostly focused on waste reduction. It was updated in 2011 with a welcome move to look at circularity. There is a broad recognition that the current framework has failed. It's failed to meet our targets. Our states haven't adequately supported enforcement of the current co-regulated approach. And that regulatory uncertainty has led to a lack of investment confidence in moves forward, both by the packaging sector and the recycling sector. Thankfully, we have agreement that a stronger approach is needed through an extended producer responsibility scheme. And what we also really need to make sure of is that we have a nationally aligned approach rather than a fragmented state-level approach. So what we really need to see is expedited national extended producer responsibility that prioritises recoverability, recyclability, traceability and Australian recycled content. This can and should be underpinned by eco-modulated levies as a market signal to encourage both sustainable design and that incentivising the use of domestic recyclate, and minimum thresholds where practical and possible for recycled content. I imagine that through this conference we're going to hear a lot about batteries, and sadly I'm going to add to that call. We know that they are an incredibly hazardous item in the wrong place. I probably don't need to go into the reasons why, but I will. Rapid digitisation and proliferation of so-called disposable electronics. I don't even know how that is legal or a word. There is a lack of consumer understanding, and there are massive gaps between product stewardship schemes and regulatory approaches. We've worked with WACRA to determine with industry that there are over 10,000 battery-related fires a year, only some of which are captured by our fire and rescue services, most of which are handled competently, but with a struggle by our sector directly. There's a huge cost to this. Anyone who's interested in the detail is welcome to go and have a look at our battery survey report published on our website. But businesses overall are incurring an average cost of over $400,000 a year, and incredible costs in detecting and managing the fires that result from misplaced batteries. We have a system of community education that really focuses on batteries. Never bin your batteries, recycle your batteries, look for the right place to dispose of your batteries. The problem is the community doesn't recognise what we call batteries. They're not just the loose cylindrical items that might come into people's minds. And furthermore, there isn't always a place to put them. So when we say batteries, often what we mean is this stuff, random things that you wouldn't even imagine a battery might fit into. A light-up scrunchie, God forbid. And a bunch of other random stuff that some of us might mindlessly buy for our kids during Vivid, for example. We really need to be thinking about how we frame this issue, but also what that means at end of use. We have worked with our RecycleMate program to determine that there are no comprehensively accessible, safe disposal options for many items with loose and embedded batteries. This is a massive problem for our sector. Every battery that doesn't have a safe disposal option is a threat to our infrastructure and our workers' safety. So mapping this is a priority, and ensuring that we have coverage that is accessible across all of Australia it should be prioritised. We've worked, for example, with the Queensland Government through RecycleMate to map where the gaps are in battery disposal. And every gap, every place that a person cannot safely dispose of a battery is a risk for our sector. We need to join the dots on that and make sure that members of the community can readily act on our request for them not to put batteries or electronics in the bin. Currently, we tell them, go and check your local government website, or go and check B-Cycle, or maybe figure out if Mobile Muster has a disposal point, or if you can't find that out, make a phone call. If we don't make it easy, the community will do the easy thing and put it in the wrong bin. So we have to make it abundantly easy. Our view is that RecycleMate is the easiest approach. It is a program with a one-stop shop, will tell you where your nearest disposal option is. On the other hand, it also can work with governments to identify where the gaps are and make sure that everyone ultimately does have a place to put these things. I just can't say it enough. There is little point in telling the community not to bin their batteries if there are no available disposal options. And for us, it is so abundantly clear why. We have been fortunate to date to avoid a fatality in our sector. There have been injuries. We need to make sure, by working with government, that we absolutely avoid this outcome. And the key message for us has to be about safe disposal of batteries and consumer electronics. I'd also want to make sure that we're not greenwashing. A lot of these items I don't think could be categorised as recyclable. Many batteries are, and they reach a good circular fate. Many electronics are items, for example, vapes. I'm not sure if we could call that recycling, but we can all agree that they need to be safely disposed of. And the community does need to understand here that the priority is safety. So we'd like to see a national approach to extended responsibility regulation for all consumer electronics, including batteries and battery-containing devices. We commend the New South Wales Government on their leadership in taking an act forward, and we commend them on creating a template that can be nationally applied. We'd like to see the federal government play their role in supporting that national harmonisation, which they should have done, and unfortunately the burden has fallen on the states. We also want to see a national campaign to ensure that everybody understands what these things are and where they should go and what they should check to find out how to do the right thing. Speaking of doing the right thing, we also need to make sure that our product stewardship schemes are fit for purpose. Currently, we see many parts of industry coming together to create a scheme, and often that is seen as an end in itself, rather than the delivery of robust outcomes. That can lead to inefficient and duplicative systems, and ultimately more costly. Many schemes cater to brand owners' interests above the interests of the rest of the supply chain. Not all. The governance of different schemes is varied, and the true cost of recycling is more often than not, particularly in voluntary schemes, but also in some mandated schemes, not properly reflected. There's self-reporting with little benchmarking or tangible targets. There's a lack of transparency, consistency, accountability and effectiveness in many schemes. And often we see material collection counted as success. We all know collection is not recycling. There's also a lack of clarity about where governments, and particularly the federal government, will intervene with product stewardship measures, and that impacts on investment certainty. I do emphasise again, particularly for those involved in product stewardship, recycling is not free or cheap in Australia. Our costs include labour, energy, logistics and adherence to our correctly stringent environmental and safety regulations. Any scheme that imagines that you can cut corners on recycling is effectively undermining the investment that is needed to deliver real recycling outcomes. We currently have a product stewardship accreditation framework that the Commonwealth Government has delivered. Unfortunately, that framework is full of holes and mostly can enable marketing rather than the delivery of good outcomes. We need to see the federal government strengthen that accreditation framework to ensure robust scheme governance, accountability, and genuine and scaled recycling outcomes. There also needs to be the establishment of a trigger framework to determine when a product stewardship is required and give industry, all of industry, a signal about where they need to invest to take those next steps. Finally, we need to face up to the fact that we really haven't closed the loop in our regulation. Resource recovery is a regulatory exception rather than the rule. We're effectively recycling through regulatory loopholes. There's a lack of alignment between environmental policies and circular economy principles, a fragmented regulatory framework across jurisdictions, and of course, a lack of consistent end-of-waste criteria. As Tony pointed out, contaminants are regulated at end of pipe rather than the source. And ultimately, all this adds up to an uneven playing field between virgin and recovered materials. That lack of distinction between waste management and resource recovery also impacts on market confidence in recycling processes. What is a recycler if we can't tell the difference? In terms of that regulatory framework, it currently treats recovered resources as waste and therefore risk and pollution, rather than recognising the circular opportunity that can be delivered. What we want to see from our federal government is a body to deliver a nationally harmonised resource recovery framework, underpinned by defined end-of-waste criteria. We need them to be focusing on boosting productivity and supporting circular economy goals. We also need to support the implementation of accreditation for recyclers to help to distinguish and provide market confidence to that service and ultimately support closing the loop. So I'm hoping that there is a good understanding of the federal government's role in their ability to unleash the full potential of recycling through strong end markets, expedited national packaging reform, action to address the urgent hazard of batteries and consumer electronics, better product stewardship, and a nationally harmonised framework to boost our sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. We'll just get the questions up on the screen again. We've had a lot more upvoting and a lot more questions this time, so thank you everyone for supporting it. So the top one is, what is the appetite for moving away from commingled recycling to increase household source separation as practiced in Europe, Japan and other countries with high recycling rates?
I guess that depends on whose appetite. I think within this room, source separation is a major priority. It would be great to see more careful and effective separation of material. I think though to get there, we really need to connect our community better to the outcome, to the cost of not doing so. I guess currently one thing that people are quite blind to is what the cost of not improving our resource recovery outcomes is. How much we're really paying for landfill, I guess embedded, for example, in council rates. None of that is really surfaced for our community. So to get the social licence that we need in order to undertake that source separation, I think that there needs to be a lot more visibility about what we're really paying right now. There has been pushback, for example, in certain jurisdictions about adding another bin, for example, for glass recycling or for FOGO. And so we really need to build awareness about what is already being paid, what's at stake right now, and what the benefit looks like.
Great. All right. Thanks, Suzanne. Thank you.